Salutations, Legion of Doom. Welcome to Podcast The Storm, where social awkward outcasts, crazy weirdos, and all-around nerds convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the nerdy occultist, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing on this fine late episode again? Wasn't my fault this time. Wasn't mine.
Yeah, and I am your host, last time on Wannabe, the brainstorm pop culture, and the fault would be mine. Last night, I kind of gotten sick, and it was actually kind of last minute, like around 7, when Don and I would usually meet up and discuss things prior to stream. And
Yeah, he texted me like 20 minutes before we were supposed to go on, and I'm like, well, shit.
yeah, no,
Fortunately, I was also very kind of sleep deprived and out of it yesterday, so it worked out fine for me.
yeah, so I was like again, I got kind of sick, and I was worried that it was going to affect me on stream. So, yeah, I don't want to get too much into it to like gross people out. Also, it's kind of my private matter. But yeah, I'm better now. Like I honestly, I just need a really good sleep, and and some like water and stuff. I mean, I was supposed to drink water, but I didn't. I had a good drink. I did drink something though, and kind of. I think it was also because I got kind of sick because I didn't really eat much yesterday.
Oh no, that's never good.
Well, I'm gonna be honest. We don't really have a lot of good food here, and food we do have that could be good takes a while to cook. And I have no like the weird thing is I come from like 2 generations of cooks in my family. I cannot cook for shit. I suck at cooking.
He's a freaking cooking squib. Although, as I've told him many times in our private conversations, that could be easily fixed if he would just binge watch the show Good Eats. It is the best cooking show in the history of humanity.
Yeah. So yeah. Not. We got some good stuff here. Ironically, most of it actually comes from me. Like only 2 things from Dalton. Everything else from me.
Mm-hmm. We were fairly evenly split this time around.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Although to be fair, I think most of the bonus show on Friday's stuff was mine, so that probably is why.
Yeah, fair enough. And we have some stuff lined up for next week as well, possibly.
Yeah, because all the things just decided to happen all at once, because when it rains, it pours.
Yeah.
It's either a complete drought or we're drowning.
Yeah.
In things to cover.
Anyway, yeah. So yeah, let's start off with the one Dalton sent me. I'll be completely honest. I did not read this. I did not skim this. Dalton told me about it. This will be kind of his show for a while until we get into the stuff I sent.
Uh-huh.
I might have something for the next article, possibly. Not entirely sure.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this is from BookRiot.com. A look into the history of the Comics Code Authority. This is by Julia Rittenberg. It's published 1 week ago.
Mm-hmm. And my main issue with this is, from my brief skim through, it seems like the author is doing a lot of editorializing, and it seems to be a lot of, those evil right-wingers over there did this thing, but my side don't do anything like that kind of thing. And you know how I hate that, you know, the rules I make don't apply to me because reasons. bullcrap. So here we are. Plus, I'm kind of a pseudo expert on the Comics Code Authority era because fuck you, Frederick Wertham, may you rot in wherever people who purposefully stymie art rot in hell. But still, yeah. Moving forward.
Yeah. In January of 2011, Archie Comics announced they would no longer feature the Comics Code Authority seal on their covers. Shortly after, DC Comics had announced the same intention.
See, this interested me because I thought they had ditched it back in like the 90s. I don't remember it being on any of the comics from when I was a kid or anything.
Yeah, for DC, I thought it was at least the late 70s to 80s because
because the story that everybody points to as like the breaking point for Marvel was the Spider-Man drug PSA story. And then for DC, I'm not really sure when the absolute cutoff was.
I'm kind of assuming
one assumes like the end of the Silver Age because that's when things switch back over to a more serious tone.
Yeah, I was kind of assuming more Green Arrow, Green Lantern, or was it Green Lantern, Green Arrow, whatever. Because you remember like the iconic image of that comic with like Speedy doing heroin.
Yeah, somewhere in there. So one assumes those were well, like I guess maybe it was just on there as a token for a while, but I don't remember. Again, I can remember having comics when I was a very little kid before 2011, and I don't remember the Comics Code seal there.
Yeah, I remember like seeing comics. I mean, granted, again, I didn't really start collecting comics till like 2013. But I'd seen comics and stuff like, present day comics, and I never saw the Comics Code, like DC Comics and stuff. And I never saw the Comics Code Authority label.
Yeah, and there was actually a label at one point, especially in the Silver Age, that was like, this comic complies with the Comics Code Authority or whatever. I think they might even have a picture of it in the article later on, but I don't remember seeing any of those. I guess it sort of lingered around informally for no reason for like a decade or two, maybe. And that's why it was like that. But as far as I'm concerned, the Comics Code Authority died in like 1980 at the latest. So
yeah, what's weird? God, when I was growing up, I got comics from my family, like Batman the Animated Series comics and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Good ones, by the way.
Yeah, well, so is damn near everything that was tied to Batman the Animated Series.
Fair enough. Again, no Comics Code Authority. No, like I think I mentioned, like the first ever comic I read was a Superman. Superman comic from I think the 90s, where like it was the fall of Metropolis, where Superman had like a bullet. And I don't remember there being a Comics Code Authority symbol on it either.
No. I've collected comics for as long as I can remember, and then some. But the first one I ever remember like asking somebody to buy for me, like in a store, was the Batman vs. Spawn one, and that one had no Comics Code Authority thing anywhere.
Wait, do you still have that?
Somewhere, yeah.
Oh, dude, I would give you money to read that.
If ever we meet in real life, I'll have to see if I can dig it out from wherever it is.
Yeah, there's actually a guy in my middle school that actually had a Predator versus Batman comic.
I didn't realize that was a thing.
Yeah.
And now I want to read that.
It was a fucking nutcase, though.
Well,
sorry, no, it's just sorry.
I mean, feel free to share with the rest of the class if you want to go into it, but
no, cool dude, just fucking nutcase.
most of the good ones are a little bit crazy, and most of the crazy ones are at least a little bit good.
Man, gotta get kicked out of school all the fucking time. So I don't know how good he was.
Oh, he was one of those types of people. Yeah, I got into frequent arguments with those kinds of people because like I was that geeky kid what actually enjoyed going to school every day, and when like those kids would just derail the class for no reason, it would annoy the shit out of me.
You're a real fucking nerd. You know that?
You don't fucking say.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the article. Um, this was a monumental decision after more than 50 years of dealing with ridiculous and outdated restrictions in order to get the seal of approval from the Comics Magazine Association of America. Okay, for one thing, I'm sure the authority, Comics Code Authority, hasn't been a thing for decades.
Again, the last time I think anyone gave a fuck was somewhere around like 1980 at the latest, and that's me being charitable and assuming it lingered throughout the 70s. Most of the impact of the Comics Code was done and dusted by the end of the 60s. Most being the operative word. Like the Silver Age is really the only time where CCA even mattered.
I will say, like, I might be a heretic for saying this, like a comics heretic, but because of like,
I will get the pitchforks and torches ready. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, like, with the creators got a little more creative with the storytelling or how they handle things without.
I mean, yes, it is a testament to the glorious creative minds of people who worked in the Silver Age that the entire comic book genre or comic book medium and the superhero genre in particular didn't just fuck off and die in the interim.
Yeah. I'm not saying
it is the Silver Age that gave us the trippy cosmic weirdness that I adore so much in comics. So if it weren't for the slings and arrows of Frederick Wertham, who knows what would have happened. But that being said, I still get massively annoyed because, and I've made this point many times, because essentially what happened was Frederick Wertham noticed that in the heyday of comics in like the 40s and 50s, a bunch of his patients he was a juvenile he was a juvenile psychologist and psychiatrist, so he dealt mostly with like kids and teens and shit. And he noticed that a large percentage of his patients were reading comics. So rather than assume these comic things must be very popular with everyone, including my patients, he assumed, a bunch of people in this mental institution are reading comics, therefore it must be the comics that are making them go insane to some degree. Not only is that a violation of the rule, never attribute to correlation what can be attributed, or never attribute to causation what can be attributed naturally to correlation, because correlation does not equal causation. There we go. But it also really shows a level of like just traditionalistic prudish preening that I don't think has ever been replicated in anyone, save for maybe Jack Thompson and Anita Sarkeesian, maybe. Because it takes a special kind of old school pompous fuddy-duddy to go, this new thing that the kids are into that I don't understand must be why they do bad things. That's just like I can't, the cognitive dissonance on these people, and there are other people who agreed with him, and so yeah, I'm not just singling out Frederick Wertham, although it is 90% his fault because he wrote a literal book on everyone panic if you catch your children reading comics. It was called Seduction of the Innocent. And he did literally stymie the comic book industry for about a decade by advocating for what eventually became the Comics Code Authority. So, fuck you in particular, Frederick Wortham, but these people in general, I don't understand. Like, to think that just because there's a new art form or a different kind of art than you're used to, it must mean some kind of moral depravity on the part of anyone who enjoys it is just stupid and idiotic, especially if you take into account that this guy was a psychologist, so he was so paranoid about comics, he literally assumed in some degree that comics caused mental illness. I mean, there's not liking a particular kind of art, and then there's this art is so bad it literally causes people to be mentally ill. Or this art is so wrong that it causes people to be mentally ill. That's like the lack of self-awareness. I can't even. But anyway, moving on.
Right. Okay. The establishment of the Comics Code Authority in 1954 was largely a reactionary measure driven by overall fear of censorship. This was not a great time in history for media in America that was thought to be "quote unquote" dangerous for children or anyone else.
I mean, that's fair because back in the day, the moralists of yesteryear were the hyper traditionalist, hyper conservative evangelicals who wanted every child to be a quote unquote good Christian, and any deviation from the leave it to beaver sort of mindset was considered deviant and aberrant and sick. And incidentally, fuck all of y'all. But yeah, moving on. Brainstormer, are you there? Or has my phone stopped working?
Sorry, I left for a second because I thought you'd talk longer.
Okay.
Um,
Well, go
yeah, no,
ahead.
I was just making myself a little quick dinner, I guess. I mean,
Haha.
not really a dinner, just chimichanga. Not a fucking word. You didn't say
Honestly,
you bought it.
I was going to go for a Deadpool reference, not a your Hispanic reference, but
No, no. Yeah, it was. What do you think I meant? What do you think I meant
because
Hispanic? I literally meant Deadpool.
okay, well that's interesting.
No, the Hispanic jokes kind of run its course, honestly. I'm gonna wait.
Ran at the speed of Speedy Gonzalez, I guess.
I'm gonna bitch slap the fuck out you that your mustache and beard fall off.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So moving on.
Yeah,
Okay.
moving forward.
Yeah. Fear for the Children in the 1950s. Before the Comics Code Authority, the Motion Picture Production Code, widely called the Hays Code, was applied to most major studio pictures released in 1954 to 1968. It was a self-censorship system to avoid the government censorship that would come down and limit the success of big studio movies. In 1968, this system was replaced with the Motion Pictures Association of America's MPAA rating system. Oh, okay. Wow, that code hasn't been around long comparatively.
No, it hasn't. But there's always been some. I mean, obviously the MPAA is a little bit more lax compared to the old one. But let's be entirely fair and entirely honest with ourselves. The MPAA is still fucked and still weird and arbitrary in its like moralism.
Also, most most movies are just fucking tame compared to before.
Yeah, I mean, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was one of the first PG-13 movies, and now PG-13 movie usually just means a G-rated movie with more swearing in it.
I mean, you can only say fuck once in a PG-13 movie.
Yes, which is in and of itself fucked.
I mean, it could work if it's for emphasis.
I mean, for like the problem I have is that the rules seem so moralistic and arbitrary. Like, there's PG-13 movies that have full on like hammer horror blood spatter, and nobody bats an eye. But you say a bad word one time, and all of a sudden, it's a federal case, or more than one time in this case. But you know what I'm saying. It's like, we can show all this graphic blood and gore and shit, but we can't have anyone swear. That would taint the minds of children. No, no. If we are to morally arbitrate over our art like that, and select out who can and cannot be part of our audience as though it's like a drug addiction or something, then can we at least have standards that like make sense? Because if you're worried about like psychologically scarring your children, they're going to be more psychologically scarred by freaking blood spatter probably than they are going to be hearing a naughty word.
Which, let's be honest, their parents say all the time in their presence.
Yes, let's also be honest about that. Human beings swear. We've always sworn. It's basically a human constant. And more to the point, if we stopped treating these words like they were such like these morally off limit things, and we just treated them like every other freaking word in the English language, they'd stop having the negative stigma. And if they stopped having the negative stigma, then nobody would care. The only transgression that occurs when somebody says fuck is in your own mind if you consider the word fuck to be a negative word. If you
Right.
stopped considering it a negative word, we could just use the word fucking fuck and not have it be a problem.
To be also, again, that's not necessarily a go ahead to just add that word all the time to a movie, because that's more just that's lazy writing.
That would just be like you're filling the dead air with swear words for no reason. But if characters are to be reasonable facsimiles of human beings, then they can swear some of the time.
Or you can get creative if you're doing like a kids movie, like a PG movie or something. Like Josh Whedon with like Firefly found a really creative way with like swear words are said in Chinese. Because like of the lore in the world of Firefly.
Or on Battlestar Galactica, it was said that in that particular timeline, the word frack was considered a swear word.
Yeah, or you know what? It's bringing comics, I guess. Like Batman, like the DCAU and like Batman Beyond and stuff, like where they created their own lingo of the future, and like certain words were technically curse words of that time period.
Yeah.
In
Dresden Files does something. Dresden Files does something really hilarious and makes people in the magical community have their own swear words. Like the ones that usually get said in the Dresden Files a lot are Empty Night, Stars and Stones, and Hell's Bells. Those are the three like wizard swear words in the Dresden Files, which I find hilarious because Jim Butcher is not shy about using regular swears too. I mean, Harry is a fully fledged character, and so sometimes he'll swear for, in places where it makes sense to swear, but he'll also sometimes just randomly go Empty Night, or actually, I think the way the hierarchy of swear words in the Dresden Files is supposed to go is Stars and Stones is the least bad one, and then Hell's Bells is like the second most innocuous one, and then Empty Night is supposed to be like this uber mega swear that people are supposed to like look at you sideways for. And the reason being is because apparently in the Dresden verse, Empty Night is actually supposed to be a massively apocalyptic event. Because for some reason everyone in the supernatural community in the Dresden Files holds stars to be like extremely sacred things. And there's a prophecy about or that there's a prophecy and a vow that Mab makes at one point in Changes, that's something to the effect of the stars will fall the night that Mab fulfills not her word. I believe is how it goes. So yeah, apparently Empty Night is a real thing in the Dresden verse, and that's why the phrase Empty Night is added to the lexicon of swear words. But this is a complete sidebar. I just enjoy the fact that Jim Butcher created his own swear words, or in that case of Hell's Bells, borrowed it from a AC/DC song. Even though he's more than willing to have mundane swears right alongside them. But moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. The reason this worked for as long as it did was because of the studio system. Hollywood was controlled by several large studios that could essentially decide how to make films that made money. For a long time, this meant sticking to the Hays Code. It had many rules that still influence film today. The requirement that queer characters had to be villainous or suffer tragic fates, regulations against the depiction and discussion of adulterous sex, and various other political rules. Okay, for the record, those are fucked. I'm not denying that. But you have to look at it from the perspective of the time period.
Yeah, because everyone, at least in the entertainment industry at this point, was a moralistic twit trying to pander to evangelicals and tradcoms.
Which is weird, isn't it? Which is weird because I'm sure a lot of celebrities and like famous people were like actually
quite left wing. Yes.
Also gay.
Well, yes, because I mean, for whatever reason, gay people are extremely predisposed to being drawn to creative fields of influence or like fields of expression. And shut up. Go ahead. I was joking.
I was just gonna say, you don't say. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, like, it's still fucked. Like, obviously. I mean, arguably though, they were still good for most of the time.
Yeah, but there are also times where you could tell that creatives wanted to do something more risque and were it was edited down or it was changed around or something. But to be fair, that's been happening for centuries. Like for example, you can't honestly sit here and tell me that Shakespeare wanted The Tempest to end with Prospero renouncing his powers, breaking his staff, and drowning his book and shit. That was mostly to pander to the fact that most of the people in like aristocratic positions of the day couldn't handle the idea of a sorcerer or a magic user being a good guy, depicted as a good guy in a play. And just like in The Tempest, when Prospero breaks his staff and drowns his book for no fucking reason, basically, there's a lot of arbitrary winks and nods to Christianity or Christian values that actively make a lot of old movies worse. Like in the original black and white Day the Earth Stood Still, and I'm mentioning this one because when I watched it, it stood out to me, and it really kind of made my skin crawl a little bit. There's a scene where the narrative like the actual organic story requires the alien whose name is Klaatu, gets injured and then resurrected by advanced technology. But because 1950s, when he gets resurrected, they have to make it temporary because, quote, the power of resurrection only belongs to the Almighty Spirit, unquote. Now, I'm interested and fascinated by the idea that, and I've said this in regards to the ancient alien theory for years. The ancient alien theorists are going to look really, really dumb when we do meet extraterrestrials and they have gods too. But being that as it may, it makes no freaking sense in the context of the story because the alien culture within the context of the story is very, very technology focused and very, very deliberately secular. So the idea that there's this taboo around resurrection technology because apparently there's an objectively measurable almighty spirit to be deferred to is really, really out there, and it kind of ruins the ending. It's kind of made clear in the context of the story, if you take that one scene out, that it was just supposed to be a straight up, we have advanced to the point where, like, human deaths no longer concern us because we can just revive ourselves. But they couldn't say that because they had to pander to Christians. And no, this isn't me bashing on Christians. This is me getting annoyed at any kind of morals. As anyone who's watched this channel for more than 5 minutes knows, I'm not a fan of social justice moralizing either. My thinking is, your morality has no place here, whatever it is, get it out, especially where it contradicts or impedes artistic expression, if you please. Moving on.
Yeah. Okay. McCarthyism was also a looming factor in the enforcement of the Hays Code. The House Un-American Activities Committee was investigating a lot of people in the entertainment industry and making random threats based on the fear of people disloyal to America. I spelled America American. To America in the post-World War II moment. This general fear of disloyalty made its way down to the 5 and 10 cent comics that kids would pick up.
Okay, it wasn't disloyalty primarily that was the issue. It was a different worldview that was the issue. The House Un-American Activities Committee singled out communists and other people they considered to be subversive. That being said, one little parenthetical here. Joe McCarthy was a senator. He had no say in the House Un-American Activities Committee because that was a House committee. As much as we all like to use McCarthyism as a shorthand for, moralistic persecution, especially on ideological grounds, there is no evidence that Joe McCarthy actually had anything to do with the House Un-American Activities Committee. And you can tell because he was a senator, and the House Un-American Activities Committee took place in the House of Representatives. Not saying he wasn't a commie-bashing fuck, but let's get our history straight here. And also, there were legitimately communist unions in certain parts of Hollywood at this time. So powerful, in fact, that at one point, Walt Disney found himself bullied by a union leader by the name of Herbert K. Sorrell, and they created the Disney is anti-Semitic meme in order to purposefully discredit him. So, yeah, there's that. Moving on, though.
And Disney doesn't hate Jews.
As far as the legitimate historical record is concerned, he had no racial opinions one way or the other as far as that goes.
Still a funny joke, though.
I mean, it is, and it works, and the reason it stuck around as long as it did is because it does work. But that being said, if we're going to talk about things like McCarthyism and communism taking over Hollywood and the arts and so forth, let's actually be historically accurate about this. My issue with McCarthyism isn't that there were no communists in Hollywood. There were, self-identifying, in fact. But my issue is, as long as they don't force feed communism in their work, they should be allowed to be communists. Because
Yeah,
while
'cause-
I consider communism to be a stupid position, and it is a very stupid position, and while I consider most communist regimes to be overly authoritarian, freedom of speech and freedom of expression implies the freedom to be wrong. So if someone wants to be a communist, they are free to be a communist. The only concern I have is when it becomes the only lens through which you see the world and it impacts every aspect of your life. Then I have a problem with it.
Mhm.
Just like with the Christians. I don't have a problem with anyone believing anything they choose to believe so long as they're not harming anyone else. But if you insist that your morality is the most important thing in the universe and you have to force it down the throats and into every sphere of influence you can, otherwise you're a bad person, then I have a problem with it. Moving forward.
The Comics Code Authority was established in 1954. Dr. Frederick Wortham's book, Seduction of the Innocent. I kind of want to read it, but also kind of not. Accused all comics of prompting delinquency and disregard for authority in children. He made this conclusion by asking young delinquents if they read comics, to which they responded yes. That feels like that's 1950s and stuff, so
Methodological nightmare. Yeah.
it's just like it feels like there wasn't. That feels like was that like the only question he asked?
There were others. There were others, but it's still like, dude. I again, either you have the option of comics cause delinquency, or you have the option of lots of people read comics, therefore some of those people will also be delinquents. That's the difference. You could interpret it as causal, i.e., they read comics, therefore that must have made them delinquent somehow, or comics might just be very popular among everyone, and that everyone includes people with mental disorders. Yeah, but again, this is the problem with moral authoritarianism, because moral authoritarians, when faced with anything that is outside of their sphere of influence, will either try to infiltrate it or destroy it. Because everything in the world has to abide by my moral standards or it's a bad thing, is how these people generally think. And I am against anyone who can allow themselves to get into that mindset, regardless of what the actual substance of their beliefs are. Moving on.
At the time, comics were so common and widespread for children that this would be like asking a kid in America today if they knew what an iPad is. In the academic journal Information and Culture, Carol L. Tilley argued that Wortham had largely fabricated and exaggerated his findings to arrive at a neat conclusion. Probably, actually, yeah.
See, I don't believe that. I think it's just a matter of he asked his patients whether they read comics and didn't bother to think, do other non-delinquent children also read comics? And also do people who are not children read comics, and so on. Because
Well,
if he had, he probably would have found comics are just a new art form and they are very popular among the masses. Because that was the correct answer, objectively.
yeah, I retract my previous statement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Moving forward.
At the time, there was also a series of Senate hearings on the relation of comics to crime, but they did not arrive at the conclusion that comics cause crime. However, apparent protests and the general fearfulness around how media influence children caused the creation of the self-censorship body, the Comics Authority.
Yeah, well, parents of the 1950s, Just because your children make choices independent of you doesn't mean they're broken. It could be that maybe you have too much of a stick up your ass.
On board?
Yep.
Rules and influence of the Comics Code Authority. It's easy to understand how a general worry about loss of revenue through protest would cause voluntary censorship of the comics. They are so widely available that submitting them to the CMAA for a read-over was a small price to pay to get that seal of approval that would allow parents to allow their kids to get comics.
Or the parents can just get the fuck over themselves.
It's already said and done, man.
I know, but it annoys me when the first reaction to like some people being unreasonable is we have to cater to their unreasonable demands or else they won't buy our product. Well, I'm sorry, but if the demands are unreasonable, then they can kick rocks. That should be your standard response. Respond to reasonable criticism with as much reason as it deserves, and tell people who make unreasonable criticism to kick rocks. That's my 2 cents on the matter.
Okay. That was so widely. Alright, I said that. If publishers decline to send their comics to the Comics Code Authority for review, their comics could not be stocked in stores. Oh, that is so. Really? Okay, before you do, Don, anyone noticing how that sounds very similar to a certain country that's done something similar to that? Like, I don't know, less than a decade prior?
Yeah, that whole pesky World War thing we were in, that second one there. Are any of these tactics ringing bells, guys?
I'm sorry. How do you not realize you were doing something so similar to a group of people that not only did that, but successfully did that and caused a lot of mayhem and chaos in the world?
Because when we do it for the right reasons, and that makes it different somehow.
Yeah, everyone thinks they're doing it for the right reasons.
And there is exactly, to the letter, the problem. No one has ever done these things under the auspices of doing the wrong thing. Everyone has some self-contained reason to believe that their ideology is the one true ideology. But my issue, and I think Brainstormer's issue as well, is that no one should do this ever for any reason, basically. Unless there is some genuinely criminal like things being unless propaganda is being made or something like deliberately self-avowed propaganda is being made, then maybe you have an argument for something like that. But the ironic thing is these measures are almost never put in place to stop propaganda. They're put in place to make sure that the only propaganda that exists is the approved propaganda. It's our propaganda, i.e., we want to make sure our children grow up into good Christians, so we need to make sure that the only messages they ever get are pro-Christian messages. Or we want to make them good German citizens, so we need to make sure that they get nothing but anti-Jewish and anti-subversive messages. Or we want to make sure they're good capitalists, so there can never be anything so much as pro-communism in there or bad, and so on. It's never about we want propaganda to be stopped. It's we want to be the ones in charge of who makes the propaganda. And then meanwhile, there's some people like us in the middle going, or maybe just not make propaganda? Question mark. Maybe just let stories be stories and let like art be art? Question mark. And you know we're shouted down by a chorus of no, of course not. Of course, art is nothing but a means to an end. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. There were 41 provisions to stick to in the Comic Censor's Bible to get the seal of approval. General rules that comics had to follow are easy to guess. No sex, no drugs, no cursing, no rock and roll, no nudity. The words terror and weird were banned from comic titles. Okay, terror I can kind of get, but weird, really?
Well, but terror also applies to like horror comics. Why like Tales from the Crypt almost died during this era. Um,
Additionally, cops had to always be right and correct, while villains always had to lose. I mean, at that, oh no, actually, never mind.
I mean, that basically means that again, the problem is it's like you must enforce our moral binary
I mean,
or you
the
cannot get
villains,
published.
the villains always had to lose. I'm okay with because that's kind of how it always goes.
I mean,
It the stories of the time. I mean,
yeah, but I mean, ha- the thing that always sticks out to me is in an alternate universe where none of this happened, in an alternate universe where comics were allowed to progress kind of organically, could there have been more interesting stories told where sometimes the villain at least had a point? Given what happened immediately after the Comics Code were basically irrelevant. Publication of things like The Killing Joke, V for Vendetta, um, Watchmen, and all those. Could we have gotten something like that several decades early if the Comics Code Authority never existed? And
um,
I think it would have made something more interesting. And not only that, but it would have also clipped this whole notion of comics are so safe and so childish, they must be for children crap in the bud.
anyway,
And yeah, moving on.
well, I did want to bring up no sex. I mean, the stories that were again. It's really more you have to ask: do these things have?
Yeah. And do they make interesting content for stories?
I mean, again, granted, I doubt at the time for the people who were creating these comics, like your Stan Lee's, Jack Kirby's, uh,
Mhm.
Steve Ditko's, uh, Neil Adams. Yeah, you got all those guys.
Right.
They're again like they're not going to be
They're not gonna make porn comics.
no or not making propaganda or anything for certain things like drugs and stuff.
And let's also be entirely fair and point out that it's not like the people making comics were subversive either. Like these are the people who were so gung ho for Americaism that they were actually symbolically their characters and their stories were symbolically in the war and fighting the Nazis before the actual government of America, before Pearl Harbor happened, and America got off its ass and joined the Second World War. We were the characters in comics were already kicking the asses of Nazis because Nazi bad. Um, so like it's not like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby are just gonna randomly go someday and be like, you know what? Let's make a pro-communist story for no reason. No, I very much doubt that would ever happen. And again, the no sex thing is like, were you expecting them to just randomly make porn for no reason?
Yeah, I don't get it. Anyway, these rules supposedly ensure the avoidance of tainting America's youth with sex, drugs, villainy, and communism. Wow, that is. I mean, okay, communism I can get, the sex, the drugs I can get, but villainy, really?
But and again, it's like maybe the youth was being decadent and degenerate, or maybe you all were just a bunch of overly censored prudes who needed to stop having such a bug up your ass. Because keep in mind this was an era where someone in the heat of the moment getting a kiss on the lips was considered too sexual for a lot of people. I mean, it wasn't until Star Trek in like 1963, 64, that the first interracial kiss um occurred between Kirk and Uhura. So this is a group of people who well and truly did have really arbitrary, really stupid, nonsensical like structure to their morality. Um, so maybe if little Jimmy is more open-minded about, for example, the use of marijuana than a reefer madness propaganda video, maybe that's little Jimmy being well-rounded and you being a little bit of a stick in the mud, 1950s parent. And and again, maybe Sarah being a little bit more sexually liberated and not wearing a full body dress that covers everything above her ankles, might be her developing some kind of individuality. And this is the thing. A lot of this boils down to don't question our rules, don't question our authority. And I'm sorry, but the authority that demands it not be questioned is the exact authority that definitely needs to be questioned. It Because generally speaking, if you have a good reason for doing something, you can just explain to people when they question you. Like, why do we wear seatbelts? Because car crashes happen, and without seatbelts, people have a tendency of flying through the window shield, and dying horribly or getting mangled. That didn't take me a whole labyrinth of abstract morality to explain. It's a necessary safety measure so that you don't die horribly or get mangled. But if you can't explain your arbitrary moral standard in a straightforward, sensible, reasoned way, then maybe you should countenance the idea that it's because there's no reasoning behind it, because it is arbitrary and authoritarian and moralist. And people questioning that shit is not unreasonable. Because that's you being unreasonable and someone else being reasonable and going, I'm sorry, but you're being unreasonable. The moment you can look at someone's questions or someone's argument as though it is inherently um, immoral is the moment you have lost your goddamn mind. No matter what morality you happen to be espousing, moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. However, the Comics Code Authority was forced to change and became less relevant over time before the complete abandonment in 2011. That is actually very surprising.
And again, I'm amazed that it was that late, but I think honestly it might have been just because after about, like I said, 1980-ish, a lot of people probably just forgot the Comics Code Authority existed because they didn't really ever use it for anything. So it's kind of like how there are still segregationist laws in the books, but after they were overturned or stopped being enforced, everyone just kind of forgot they were there because nobody cared enough to know they were still there. It's like you might have an old analog TV set or an old VCR in your living room or whatever, but if you never use it or even turn the thing on, then you're probably just gonna forget that it's there half the time.
I mean, to be fair, like it could have just more formality or whatever. I honestly, again, it's surprising that it didn't disband earlier, far earlier.
I think like I say, I think it de facto disbanded a long time before that, but everyone just sort of didn't give a damn, so they didn't bother to actually formally get rid of it. And then somebody in 2011 probably went, "Hey guys, you know that thing we haven't enforced for like 50 years? Why do we still have it on the books?" It's like, oh, good point, random intern. Let's formally denounce the Comics Code Authority now.
Okay. In 1971, a review of the code was caused by Marvel's request to publish special issues of Spider-Man comics which involved drug use. The Comics Code Authority subsequently relaxed certain rules in a way that was more in line with current freer attitudes towards sex, drug use, and the publication of horror comics with disturbing imagery. Okay, one thing, if I remember the documentary that I watched, those issues of Spider-Man were published under the table of the Comics Code Authority because they refused to publish them.
Yeah, and Stanley and whoever else was working on Spider-Man at the time was just like, but what if we like just publish them anyway? And then of course it made boatloads of money and was very well regarded, and everyone was interested in it and so on and so forth. And after that it was like, okay, if we could get away with that, what else can we get away with? And then yay and behold, about a decade later, most people hadn't even heard of the Comics Code Authority, and the most popular comics being made and written in that day were like Watchmen, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, and the very beginnings of Neil Gaiman's Sandman. And yes, I'm aware the 90s went overboard and went overly dark and overly edgy as a result of this. But I think it's fair to say that part of the reason they were like that is because they were overcompensating for all the shit they couldn't get away with for the decade of the Silver Age. Had comics just organically continued along in a natural progression without external moralistic meddling, they probably never would have gotten quite that extreme. Probably would have just been like, let's tell these interesting darker stories when we come up with them, and go back to the more wholesome ones when we want to. Yay.
Alright. Similar to the erosion of the Hays Code, the Comics Code Authority just became more limited over time, and people found ways around it. In the 1970s and 1980s, comic book publishers started to find ways to avoid the seal of approval altogether. And instead of selling their comic books to stores that required CCA approval, they sold them to comic book shops that served comics lovers and of all ages, and didn't necessarily care about parental approval for codes. An example of a movie flouting the Hays Code to great success was Some Like It Hot. It was released without the approval of the Hays Code and was a massive hit.
Yay.
Okay.
People genuinely fighting authoritarian power makes me happy whenever it happens, basically. The problem being is sometimes you get this thing that happens where people will win that kind of argument and then still think they're the rebels afterwards, rather than acclimating to the fact that they're the new establishment. Moving forward.
In 1989, the code received updates again, partially because DC wanted to eliminate the seal of approval altogether, give a wider berth to their artists and writers. However, after 1989, the rise of independent comic book publishers and the fact that most comic books could be found in comic book stores meant that they weren't totally beholden to the Comics Code Authority, the seal of approval. In 2001, Marvel withdrew from the Comics Code Authority's regulations and designed their own rating system. By 2011, Archie Comics and DC were the last two submitting for seals of approval, and then they were the last dominoes to fall. I'm honestly, legitimately surprised by that.
Yeah, it really shouldn't have taken that long. It really honestly should have happened in the 60s, or the late 60s and 70s, when people mostly just were like, and fuck the CCA. Which, to be fair, was the correct answer. Why it wasn't the original answer, I will never fucking know, but as is usually the case, people generally just want to be considered good people, and if somebody comes along with a really counterintuitive way that you can be considered a good person, then a lot of people are just going to passively jump on it. Because you just don't want to rock the boat. Well, I'm sorry, but sometimes the boat needs rocked. Roundabout when it starts sinking is probably a good time. Like when you're on the Titanic and the captain is heading towards an iceberg, you probably should say something to the effect of, "I'm sorry, Captain, but isn't that a giant fucking iceberg that we should avoid before we crash into it?" And if the captain's response is, "Yeah, we're unsinkable, you have nothing to worry about," then run the other direction to the lifeboats with you. Moving on.
Yep. Okay. Where are the queer superheroes? There are a lot of them. They just don't get used to them, which is honestly a fucking shame because they're really cool, especially like
and some of the time, characters who had no previous history of being gay will get turned gay rather than even stopping somewhere in the middle and being bisexual because of arbitrary moral woo. But that's a bit of a different conversation. I'm just, again, the main reason I wanted to cover this article is the person who wrote this article seems kind of one way blind. Like, she's on board with disavowing the Comics Code Authority, but it seems like she trips a little bit too much into the other direction of, and therefore let's enforce my morality on comics. And yeah, no thanks. And I'm speaking as somebody who is gay and whose favorite couple in comics currently is Hulkling and Wiccan. Thank you very much. Still don't think that you should randomly just turn characters with no previous history of being gay without at least considering the possibility of simple bisexuality.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't change their entire personality in the process either.
Iceman.
Yeah. And apparently now Wolverine and Cyclops are a thing. I heard that just recently.
Yeah, I think I heard it like last year or something.
Yeah, which I'm of two minds on, because if you ever wanted to do a ostensibly straight couple of characters suddenly become a gay couple, that kind of makes sense. And I think a lot of people have made the joke of like, with you two lusting after Jean all the time, why don't you just fuck already? But I think most people, when they said that, were joking. But again, I still find it amusing just because that is kind of a long-standing joke of, with you two lusting after her so often and yet not really paying much attention to her when you have her, maybe you guys just kind of are into each other and you enjoy this like aggressive foreplay.
Yeah. There's a character that I did research on for a video I made on my other channel. That is gay. Batwoman, Kate Kane, for a rewrite of the CW Batwoman show, season 1.
Because it needs it horribly.
It needed it immensely.
We tried to make it all the way through season 1 and review every episode. I think we got 7 before our desire to live outweighed our desire to finish.
Yeah. But for one thing, and I've said this so many times already, they completely fucked over the character of Kate Kane, aka Batwoman.
Yeah. And on the topic of queer superheroes, that is my biggest problem with queer superheroes. They can't just be characters who also are queer. They have to be queerness as a character.
Right. What's funny is, okay, this is going to be a tangent. I know it. I don't get to do them often.
By all means.
All right, with Kate Kane, and I've said this a few other times, especially like it's also in my rewrite video. But yeah, it's such an interesting character with an interesting backstory. I mean, she's taken by effectively a terrorist group as a child called the Religion of Crime.
Mm-hmm.
She is forced. Again, this is just the comics. I did a little different alterations to my rewrite to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
But she is forced to watch her mother and sister killed in front of her, I believe. don't. If you guys want to fact check me, go ahead and research the character.
Mm-hmm.
She basically becomes fucking depressed over most of her life and tries to drown herself in booze by becoming a socialite and stuff. She is the cousin to Bruce Wayne, Batman, and yeah, she follows in her father's footsteps, who also is a badass soldier who saved her with some friends by launching a military assault on the religion of crime.
Mm-hmm.
However, she did get kicked out of the military because at the time, the whole what was it? Don't kiss, don't tell.
Don't ask, don't tell.
Don't ask, don't tell. Thank you, Dalton.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, I changed that because modern day it just wouldn't make sense because it kind of abolished that.
Yeah.
Granted,
Now, let it be noted for the record that there was a practical consideration for the don't ask, don't tell.
yeah, no, I agree. Mainly, I do agree with like the whole no fraternizing within a unit.
Because it creates a conflict of interest that makes you want to prioritize
But
the well-being of your partner over the well-being of the unit. But that should be gender and orientation blind as far as I'm concerned.
yeah, very much so. Preferably, if you're going to date in the military, just date someone from like either another unit or someone in a different branch of the military.
Yeah, so somewhere that you're not going to be on the same battlefield at any given time.
Yeah,
because that's going to create a conflict of interest, which is not good for military operations. And when military operations fail, people can die or get blown up or God knows what else.
yeah, it's a whole clusterfuck. But again, the character is still pretty fucking cool. Before I think they kind of messed her up recently, or well, no, they actually haven't really done anything with that character in the comics, which is a fucking shame.
It's kind of like with Hulkling and Wiccan. Like I remember a couple of years ago when Spider-Man or sorry, Iceman came out in the largest conceivable air quotes. I was left wondering, why would you make a character who's been straight for 50 years gay when you already have pre-established gay characters who are awesome and in need of storytelling?
I would be interested if it was, if they because the character was created in the 1960s.
Yeah.
So
X-Men were 67, I think, unless I'm wrong.
I'm gonna do a quick search for that. But and let's be honest, with today from like the Bryan Singer's movies, and I know you don't like them, Don. I don't predict. I like the ones that kind of came on very later than like the first couple.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Logan was great. Both Deadpools were pretty good, and New Mutants
I did like
tried something.
I did like the Wolverine as well, but that's just me.
Yeah, that one was all right.
I also like Days of Future Past, but I can see mainly I would prefer the Rogue cut, mainly because it has more in it.
Yeah.
But what the fuck was I gonna say?
Bryan Singer X-Men.
Yeah, Bryan Singer X-Men movies did kind of. Let's be honest, the X-Men have kind of always been somewhat allegorical in whatever way.
Yeah, in the 60s, it was very much civil rights-y.
Right.
In the 2000s, when Bryan Singer got a hold of them, it was gayness.
Right. Which is fine. It can work. Mainly, they're just people trying to be seen as people, which is something I'm sure all of us.
Yeah, they're just when it gets right down to it, the X-Men are outcast, and even someone with no greater minority status who likes comics can get into that for most of recent history, because even if you were white, straight, yada yada yada, if you read comics and got genuine meaning out of comics in like the 60s, you were considered a nerd. And not saying they're equivalent levels of outcastness, obviously, but especially in that 1950-1960 range, nerd was its own kind of outcast. Trust me.
Okay, so 1963.
Oh, so same year as Doctor Strange then. Dang.
Also a few months before Doom Patrol.
Neat.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people like to equate that Doom Patrol inspired the X-Men. I'm not sure how much of that is factual or not.
I wouldn't say so. I can't really think of any properties that I would say went to inspiring X-Men. I mean, obviously there was kind of the atomic era fascination with things like genetic engineering and radiation and stuff, but
Well, outsiders being heroes.
yeah. But the funny thing is, most heroes are, in some sense or other, an outsider. Even someone like Superman is an outsider because, much as he loves humanity and considers himself part of humanity, he's always going to be standing apart from it in some sense.
Yeah.
Batman, much more obvious, he deliberately makes himself a socially isolated outsider because it's the best way he knows how to work.
What was I gonna say? Like the Iceman, like if they had kept him like from the 60s, it could have made sense. They kept himself hidden.
Yeah, if he was in the closet.
Yeah,
But even then, though, like
it's still
there's no reason his personality needed a complete overhaul.
obviously they just totally fucked that character over.
Yeah, because I don't know if you guys, if you more or less social justice types realize this or anything, but we, people of various minority statuses, are still fully rounded people. It's not like we become a minority status and then all of a sudden that becomes the entirety of our personality. As fruity and stereotypically gay as I can occasionally be, what with my liking ballet and opera and shit, um, and musicals and what have you, um, I liked those things long before I even realized I was any particular orientation, and I dare say I would like those things even if I didn't, even if I didn't look that way. It just so happens that I'm also a very stereotypically gay dude, insofar as I'm bisexual. So there.
Seriously,
But even then, it's not the entirety of my personality. I also have my comics obsessions, my occult fixations, and on and on and on. We can go.
yep. Shall we?
Yeah. Moving on.
In a similar fashion to comic censorship to meet CCA guidelines, large-scale comic book movies have scenes with queer characters being visibly queer removed from the final cut of the film. This could be a combination of the trickle-down of the Hays Code and the Comics Code Authority. Common refrain from the studios is to blame international markets like China for the supposed need to cut possible offensive material from the movies. That is a thing, and I think Dolan and I think I can speak for Dolan and myself, is that we do not like that kind of stupid thing.
Yeah, it's bullshit when you prioritize something external to the story or the art
Right.
or something diegetic in the art.
Right, but also I mean, if you cut something out, again, it could like the scene of possibly like a gay character kiss another character, kiss another gay character. You cut it out. Like, there's a possibility that it just doesn't fit. Like, for multiple reasons. Like, I speak as myself who's done editing and directing before.
Yeah. Editors kind of make stupid decisions all the freaking time, regardless of politics or whatever.
That's not what I was saying. That's not what I was going to say. Is to cut out a scene that, well, again, like, there are multiple reasons, like studio mandates, stupid decision, as Don said, or because, like, to the editor, that scene doesn't really seem to work with the flow of the rest of the movie.
Yeah, which was the reason given why there's no awesome dog scene in the Doctor Strange movie, and there should be.
No, I agree with that one. Like that scene should have been kept in. It's just I don't know why.
Yeah, it's one of those things of like it the way that Scott Derrickson described it was he was supposed to be at his worst in that moment, so giving him a sympathetic moment would have ruined it. But my thinking is you still have to get him to the Ancient One somehow. And as the final cut of the movie is concerned, um, it just sort of happens randomly. Like Mordo sees him, and we don't really know why he takes him there. He just takes him there. Um, whereas had you left the dog scene in, you could have seen that even at his worst, Strange is still someone who is predisposed to helping and healing people, which would have been a decent motivation for somebody like Mordo, who is very, very, very much a stickler for going by the moral rules and the book. That's his whole MCU character is the enforcement of natural law and the considering of using sorcery to bend those rules as a bad thing. That's why he gets mad at the Ancient One later. Um, but as it sits, we don't really find out about the altruistic core of Doctor Strange until after he accidentally kills um, Scott Adams' character, the one random zealot henchman dude, by accident, and then he cites the Hippocratic Oath. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
that movie would have flowed so much better if they had kept the dog scene in.
right.
Also, probably the Caecilius arguing with the priest scene, but I understand why that one was cut because that would have genuinely offended some Christians, probably.
I Christian here love that scene immensely, mainly because Mads Mikkelsen is just fucking amazing.
Well, it also adds an interesting philosophical um aspect to it, and also we know Mads Mikkelsen's character is the villain, so having the villain say something like that is perfectly fine because obviously we know he's wrong at the end of the movie. So if you truly did care about, oh, they insulted my god or my prophet, you can just interpret it as haha, the villain got what he deserved because he was such an idiot.
Yeah. Anyway, shall we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Comics Code Authority definitely regulated what kind of visible queerness was allowed in comics, but many comics historians argue that queerness is foundational to the invention of comics. Like Ramsey Fawza's comic history book, The New Mutants, Superheroes, and the Radical Imagination of American Comics. I mean, you're dealing with guys in spandex, but that's more from circus and uh, vaudevillian kind of deal.
And let's be fair, it's also probably to titillate female readers because let's be entirely honest. There
Yeah,
were there were some girls gawking at Superman because of how hot he was, and given Siegel and Schuster's little explainer as to why they made Superman like that, it kind of makes sense. Um, but I would say no. I would say there's nothing inherently queer about superheroes. And again, speaking as a bisexual but prefers guys to the point of it almost being irrelevant, dude. Um, Speaking as someone who is technically quote unquote queer, I don't think that queerness is fundamental to comics. I think if anything, the pulpy extremity of genre is more essential to comics because comics are wonderful in the sense that they take genres from all other forms of storytelling and they turn them up to 11 because comics wind up being the places where stories that can't be told or wouldn't be told elsewhere can be told.
right.
And that goes all the way back to, penny dreadfuls and dime novels and pulp magazines.
Um, hang on. Moving on.
Moving on.
Comics regulation today. Part of the downfall of the Comics Code Authority is probably due to comics readers growing up. Kids who loved comics in the 1950s grew up and naturally wanted to read comics that dealt with more complex adult things. Okay, yeah, you're saying that like they didn't before.
That's not new. You okay? I'm gonna have to rant at this woman because she just got through explaining who broke comics originally to begin with. So I'm
Okay,
going to have to,
we went back then.
yeah, I'm going to have to pad this out for her. Sweetheart, initially, comics were for everyone, in particular, the poor. That's why pulps are called pulps, because they were made out of inferior quality paper because it was cheaper to print on pulp paper than it was on more refined paper. So if you wanted to say that comics originally had a working class bent, I couldn't disagree with you. But comics in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, before the invention of the Comics Code, were for everyone. Everyone, okay? And you can tell because one of the most common readerships for comics during the 30s and 40s were GIs. Comics were included in care packages to the people who were fighting on the goddamn front lines of World War fucking One and or World War Two, excuse me. Um, Point being, comics were originally a universally popular art form for everyone, and the comics are for kids bullshit comes largely from the aforementioned meddling by Frederick fucking Wortham and his ilk, because he erroneously thought that comics should be targeted primarily to children, and so the establishment of the industry and the legal system eventually caved to that pressure and agreed with him. Before that, the two most popular forms of comics were superhero comics and horror comics of the sort that you would get in EC Comics, i.e., the creators of Choke, Gasp, or Tales from the Crypt. So I don't want to hear this bullshit because some of the most popular characters in the golden age of comics and the latter part of the pulp era were dark as fuck, such as the colonial era quote unquote superhero and witch hunter Solomon Kane or Elric of Melbourne, although Elric of Melbourne was 60, so that doesn't quite count. Or the Shadow. Don't even try to sell me on this comics are for kids bullshit until you have seen what the golden age Shadow got up to and the pulp era Shadow got up to, because you, madam, will be having a hell of a time convincing me of that. Um, and you want to know the reasons why a lot of the more scary and terrifying um, comic subject matters were banned in the Comics Code Authority is because due to the fact that the pulp horror and the superhero genre or the adventure story were the most popular types of stories in those mediums, they drew a lot from each other. So you would have um, characters like Batman or Superman fighting zombies or going up against beings who were made of literal nightmares or so on. So yeah, no. What happened was comics were for everyone, and then some assholes got it into their heads erroneously they should be made for kids, and they broke it, and then shortly thereafter, those same fuddy-duddy moralistic parents who insisted that comics be kid-friendly also got it into their heads that comics were quote-unquote kid stuff, and shamed and shunned any kids or any people who maintained a love of comics into their adulthood or their teenage years. Hence why the nerds got outcast and shit. because people would catch you reading comics at the age of, I don't know, 15 or something, and they would go, "Tee-hee, that's kid stuff. You must be retarded or something." So yeah, no, it's not a question of comics being made for kids and then growing up. It's a question of comics were for originally everyone, and then some assholes externally who hadn't had any familiarity with comics got it in their head they should be primarily for kids, and then those very same moralistic fuddy-duddies got it in their heads that they were only kid stuff, and therefore anyone who sticks with them afterwards should be shamed. So essentially what happened is something worked perfectly well, comics worked perfectly well in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Frederick Ortham and his ilk came along and broke the industry, and then they blamed the industry for being broken and responding to their insistence that that industry be made kid-friendly by making it extremely colorful and extremely lighthearted. So essentially, no, and not only no, but you should know better because you just mentioned Frederick Wertham. Comics were for everyone, then Frederick Wertham came along, insisted they be made kid-friendly, and then some people, probably the same kinds of people, blamed comics for being too kid-friendly, or too kid-focused. So no, comics were always for everyone, and if Frederick Wertham and his ilk had fucked off and left everyone to their own devices, comics would have never gotten the reputation of being for kids. End of discussion. Unless you want to try and tell me that some GIs in World War II were too juvenile, even as they stood up to defend the world from the freaking Nazis. But good luck with that argument, love. Moving on.
Yep. Okay. Coupled with changing mores mores around sex, drugs, rock and roll, and physical violence, Comics Code Authority quickly became a relic of the past.
Yeah, because it was arbitrary and moralistic and short-sighted and prudish the entire time. And incidentally, the only reason why rock and roll was included in the Comics Code Authority as something that couldn't be included is because rock and roll was something else that was getting popular among the youth that their parents didn't understand or found to be vulgar, and so they thought they'd kill as many birds with one stone as possible. But the kids like this new rock and roll music, and I don't understand it, so it must be bad. Derp. Moving forward.
Okay. Comics were thought to be only for kids, and therefore had to promote good all-American values to the children. However, comics were also an art form with an underground movement and a ton of interest in questioning authority, so it became difficult to maintain a super wholesome image across all comics media. All publishers have their own internal guidelines and decisions, but the general idea is to tell good stories. Used to be, now not really.
Yeah, now it's the new crop of moralistic fuckwits what control everything. And again, I really don't like that we ever had to pander to Christian values, quote unquote. But nor do I particularly like the notion of needing to pander to social justice either. I would prefer art sans moral pandering, if at all possible. Like, we could just not bother with morality and tell decent stories about well-rounded and compelling characters in well-rounded and compelling worlds.
Hello.
Yeah. But, whatever, what do we know?
Alright, like the rise of independent cinema after the downfall of the studio system, an industry-wide self-sufficient body was more difficult to maintain. Nowadays, the comic book legal defense fund can assist with comics that deal with censorship. It feels more important to protect the right to tell stories than protect the nebulous idea of childhood innocence.
Not to mention the fact that most children hate the idea of childhood innocence, and a lot of kids aspire to expose themselves to the things their parents would rather they not be exposed to. Because the one thing you want to be when you're a kid is a grown up, because grown ups get to be taken seriously and respected. And when you're a kid, nobody takes you seriously or respects you, and you want that. So you aspire to some idea of adulthood. Usually it's a very childish, one dimensional idea of adulthood, but so too is the idea of childhood very one dimensional and childish a lot of the time. Because truly mature people, right, don't give a fuck about what other people think is mature. Truly mature people just kind of do their own thing. Because only a child really cares that much about maturity, quote unquote. When you grow up, that growing up isn't a milestone you reach and go, okay, I'm a grown up now. I need to put away everything that I used to love. It's a milestone you reach when you go, I no longer give a fuck about what everyone else thinks. I'm going to do my own thing. Moving on.
Yep. So that was the end of the article. We're going to move to another article, the other one Dalton sent me.
Mhm.
This one, honestly, a part of me wanted to cover this one first, but I feel like it's warranted that we cover it now.
Uh-huh.
This is from ScreenRant.com. None of the Magic users in DC Comics actually use magic.
You talentless motherfuckers.
This is written by Joshua Isaac. It was published 4 days ago, which would make it August the 5th. Now, unfortunately, Don, I would ask that you get mad at the writer himself because he's just reporting it.
Yeah, I usually get mad at the portion of the article that actually contains like the arguments. If it's not the person who wrote the article making the arguments, then by all means, all my ire is saved for the actual stupidity and not the person reporting it. I don't want to shoot the messenger.
Right. Okay.
But if you make like an op-ed or something, and the opinions and thoughts contained within are your own and they are stupid, then I will take issue with you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Watchmen's Dr. Manhattan, subheader, Watchmen's Dr. Manhattan reveals a surprising truth about the many magic users of the DC Universe. None of them are actually using magic. Don, before we do, since you are more knowledgeable of this, how would you describe magic in the DC Universe? Like what it is?
Okay, it changes depending on what the writers need, and of course when the universe gets rebooted.
Simplest explanation, the most basic that doesn't really seem to change.
Honestly, one of the reasons I like comics as much as I do is because as somebody who does study this stuff in real life, is a practicing occultist and has been for 15 years or so now, comics generally take magic and the occult fairly seriously as far as things go. Obviously, they scale it up a little bit, kind of like how you'll see in sci-fi when you'll take something that's theoretical, like a teleportation device, and you'll make it easier for the sake of the story because we need, Kirk or Picard to beam down up from the planet and so on. That's generally what comics do with magic. There's some like in-universe explanation, usually, like for example, I think in both cases they say they're drawing energy from different spiritual planes, which, by the way, is generally accurate if what you're talking about is high magic. Generally, the goal of high magic is to draw energy from higher dimensional or other dimensional sources. Usually some kind of spiritual being like a angel, a demon, a fae, or so on. And using their energy as a fuel for your own magic, which is distinct from low or natural magic, which is mostly fueled by either the practitioner's own personal energy or the energy of the living things around the practitioner. And that seems to, for the most part, be consistent with both the real world explanation of magic and the comic explanation of magic. Obviously the sources change around a little bit. Like in the recent DC Witching Hour story, they made a claim that all magic comes from Hecate, which I personally don't like because I don't like the idea that it just comes from one pantheon or one source. And previous to that, in the New 52, there was a series of energies that were sort of color coded along natural energy source lines. Like you had the red that was the source of all like mammalian life. You had the green that was the source of all like plant life. You had the white, which was sort of divine energy or the energy of life as a whole. You had the rot or the black, which obviously was fueled by decay and death and cause of decay and death and so on. But yeah, for the most part, the most consistent thing that magic users in comics do is they draw energy from some extra dimensional or usually spiritual place in accordance with most understandings of Western high magic in the real world. Moving on. I'll get more into the actual definition of magic as they actually go and define it, because I'll get into it when they get into it. Moving on.
According to Dr. Manhattan, none of the magicians in the DC universe actually use magic. One of the most powerful characters in comics history displays his full power in Doomsday Clock, a limited series written by Jeff Johns with art by Gary Frank and colors by Brad Anderson. This series bridges the gap between DC Universe and the world of Watchmen. The landmark work by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, Dr. Manhattan originates from Watchmen, and with his nigh omnipotence, reveals the secrets of magic through science.
No, I've read through this. He really doesn't. There's no science involved. There's logic involved, but okay, this is going to be the fundamental problem with this. There is a difference between empirical scientific logic and symbolic or fundamental logic, otherwise known as necessary logic. Like math is not dependent on empiricism. Math is logically absolute. And something being rational is different from something being scientific. Science requires a deference to naturalistic empiricism and experimental verification. It essentially, and this is one of my major issues with empiricism. Empiricism defers to sufficient logic, i.e., it must be the case because it's good enough, as opposed to necessary logic, i.e., it must be the case because otherwise would be incoherent. And also, and this is another issue I have with empiricism, empiricism kind of defers solely to the authority of reality, which can often lead to what's called an is-ought fallacy, i.e., this is the case, therefore it ought to be the case. which is a bit of a problem. Magic is, or generally, is more logical, i.e., strictly logical, and not empirical. They're different sides of the universe. They're different parts of reality. The mundane physical universe is largely governed by the laws of science, but math and other logically absolute parts of reality need no deference to empiricism. It doesn't matter if every physical object in the universe is obliterated from existence. Math will still be fundamentally functional because math is more based on logic than empiricism. So you don't have to be scientific in order to be rational. You do have to, at some point, be rational to be scientific because empiricism is a kind of logic, but it is not the only kind of logic, and it is certainly far from the most pure logic because, as we just went over, empiricism is necessarily tied to physical, mundane reality. Logic supersedes and precedes physical, mundane reality as far as anyone can reasonably ascertain. Because logic is necessary, not sufficient, generally, in its purest form. Moving on.
Yeah, okay. Failure of the New 52 Project DC editorial to reboot their universe once again with the DC Rebirth Initiative. This in turn led into the technological convergence of the DC and Watchmen universes, in which Batman encounters Rorschach, Lex Luthor meets Ozymandias, and the entire story seems to boil down to a showdown between Superman and Dr. Manhattan. Manhattan, who perceives time in a non-linear fashion, is unable to see past this meeting, leading him to assume only two terrifying outcomes: either Superman destroys him, or he destroys everything. I got nothing to say to that. I mean, it sounds interesting, but
it's not really material to this particular topic of conversation. It's kind of giving the background. But I kind of got sidetracked in my little epistemological rant over just a minute ago. The point I was trying to make is I believe the phrase they use later on when they quote Dr. Manhattan explaining how magic works, he refers to it as the leftover power of creation. He does not, however, refer to it in scientific terms or by using scientific terminology or forces to explain it. He doesn't defer to, for example, electromagnetism or the strong and weak nuclear forces. The power of creation is very much a very poetic and non-scientific way of putting something like that. So I'm willing to say he put it in logical terms, but he didn't put it in scientific terms. Because in addition to empiricism and naturalism, science is also based on a particular set of forces, usually electromagnetism, potential energy, or kinetic energy, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. Those are like the three. Well, and thermal is sort of thrown in there with electromagnetic energy. And again, we'll get into my personal definitions of magic as we get into his apparent rebuttals for it that aren't really rebuttals. That's my issue. The article here is misleading because at no point does Dr. Manhattan's definition of magic preclude it from being magic. It just explains it in rational terms. And something can be rational without being scientific. So there. Moving on.
Doomsday Clock number 9, Dr. Manhattan defends himself against an attack from dozens of superheroes, including the magic-based members of Justice League Dark. After Green Lantern's attack fails miserably, and even dissects his ring, Zatanna and Constantine attempt to burn and freeze Manhattan. You all believe you're wielding magic. Manhattan uses as the League's attacks serve as little more than annoyance. He further observes that the team is harnessing the scraps of creation, similar to efforts in computer code, errors in computer code, which are quickly tossed out by programmers, left to be picked up and used by those who also find themselves discarded and forgotten.
Okay, see, that is not a scientific explanation. Huh?
Nothing. I was continue.
Okay. See, that is not a scientific explanation. That's barely even an analogy. As for me and my personal definitions of magic, um, I've always viewed it as the fundamental manipulation of non-scientific life energy. I sometimes also refer to it as the weaponizing of the soul, because the way I look at it is this: we as a civilization have mastered almost every type of energy there is to master. We've even split the atom. Why is it we don't master the energy within ourselves, our own personal spiritual energy? And this is an energy that is known throughout most human civilizations. In a lot of Eastern countries, it's called chi or kwai or prana, I believe, by the Buddhists and the Hindus. The Romans called it spiritus. Certain tribes in Africa refer to it as miyama. The Polynesians refer to it, I believe, as mana or mana, which is also where D&D got it from, the idea of mana. And there's some gray area there because the notion of mana or mana doesn't really map onto that particularly well, but for all intents and purposes, it's the same force behaving slightly differently in different contexts and through different methodologies, or a similar energy breaking down into sort of subvariants. But that's basically the the working definition of magic that I have. And again, as previously stated, it functions in logical terms, but non-scientific ones. Apart from that, I'm fine with the notion of scraps of the energy of creation, because again, the energy of creation doesn't really specify like scientific forces. Like he didn't say you're wielding atomic energy or something. He didn't say you're wielding electromagnetic energy. He said he narrowed it down specifically to scraps of creation, and then he analogized it by comparing it to computer code, which actually isn't a terrible thing either, because like I said, magic functions more like mathematics than it does science. So it's more about fundamental laws of logic than it is about deferring to the external authority of reality or any given dimension. And as stupid as it is, even Doctor Strange 2016 kind of got this right when the Ancient One compared spell language to programming language, because essentially, and this is going to get into some technicals, and yes, I'm aware a lot of people have different definitions of these things than I do, but in my experience, these are the ones that make the most sense and contradict the fewest other fields of human inquiry. Magic functions by bypassing empirical forces and getting to the root causes of those forces and functionally changing the language through the use of, as I said, non-scientific life energy. The weaponizing of the soul. That is functionally how magic functions. It's got more in common even with programming language than it does with mathematics, because mathematics at least requires some kind of deference to numbers, whereas programming language is pure logic in its most fundamental form. And the reason why a lot of magic is based on ritual is because there's a notion that in science, there's a notion of everything kind of being its own separate isolated thing. But in Magic, there's no such thing as a closed system. It's kind of like if you can predict every force that is going to impact a dice, then you can predict with 100% certainty where the dice is going to land at any given time because it's impacted by forces. And the only reason why the roll of a dice appears random is because you can't possibly calculate for all those forces. Well, in the same way, if a magician is trying to manipulate a dice roll, what he does is he uses life energy, either from himself, from external natural forces like a tree or grass or what have you, or other animals or whatnot, or in the case of high magic, other dimensional energies like from an angel, a demon, a fairy, or what have you, and he manipulates that dice by having an impact on it with those energies. And because these energies are non-scientific, they can't be detected by scientific instrumentation. Scientific instrumentation is only calibrated for picking up certain energies, the electromagnetic spectrum, the strong and weak nuclear forces, and so on. So if there's an energy that they can't detect, then that energy can have an impact on that dice roll in the same way that any other physical, tangible force can have. And you wind up with the magician being able to control effectively control the laws of probability by having an impact on the object being manipulated probabilistically. Same thing works with a deck of cards. Same thing works with whether it balloons from there. Once you realize that you can control fundamental energies of the universe and manipulate them directly in a logical manner using ritual, like rituals essentially work in the same way machines work. You have one thing impacts another thing impacts another thing. It's the universe is one giant Rube Goldberg machine effectively. And if you know where the buttons are and how to push them, then you can get basically any result out of that Rube Goldberg machine that you want because it's an infinite, effectively a hyper complex Rube Goldberg machine. Sorry. Moving on. But the long and the short of it is I'm confused as to why Dr. Manhattan doesn't realize that this is a workable definition of magic. The character thinks he is debunking magic, when in actuality he is doing no such thing. He is explaining it in rational terms, but he's not debunking it. He's just offering an explainer, which is the same explainer that somebody like John Constantine might give if somebody ever asked him how his magic works. Like, he would sit there with them for 2 hours and explain basically what I just did of, like, I take my energy, I manipulate fundamental forces of the universe with logical terms, and so on. Moving on.
Manhattan's observations that magic is merely leftovers from the creation of the universe is appropriately chilling. Only the most powerful sorcerers in the DC universe can hurt him.
Okay, because he is made of more primordial stuff than they're wielding, and quite frankly, it's kind of stupid on John and whoever was doing the ice spells part to even try to use fire and ice to undo him when you consider that he's made of energy, guys. Even if you thought that would work somehow, it doesn't mean that magic doesn't affect him. It means that you can't expect a being who is effectively made of electromagnetism to be affected by electromagnetic energy. It's like throwing a magnet at Magneto and expecting some harm to come to it. If he can control those energies, then you're fucked. If you had conjured up an angel or something, then maybe that would have done something to him, because that's a type of energy that he's not composed of, and therefore probably could damage him significantly. That I more blame on John and whoever else the practitioner was that was using ice on him being kind of stupid. But I wouldn't consider the fact that magic is the leftover energy of creation to be showing. I don't know why anyone would. In fact, funny thing about this, in the Dresden Files, which is one of the best fantasy series out there for magic users, if you're interested in magic and the occult and stuff, Dresden also often refers to magic as wielding the fundamental forces of creation. Doesn't mean it's not magic. Just means that's the definition of the word. Moving on. You still there?
Right. Okay. Dr. Manhattan is analytical in every situation, but it's especially noticeable when he can't see the future. Before he became the most powerful being in the Watchmen universe, indeed the only superhero actually has powers, John Osterman was a scientist. After all, magic in the DC universe would certainly be a new sight for him. While the Marvel universe has multiple scientific explanations for sorcery, magic in the DC universe isn't meant to be understood, merely to be used to see the often horrible truths about the world.
No. Wrong. And this is exactly why I take issue with this article. Magic is perfectly understood by those that wield it. It's just no one ever fucking asks. And when we give you an explanation, you try to read between the lines instead of taking the explanation we actually fucking give you. I've had this issue in real life with a lot of people. When I tell you how it works, you can't just scoff at how me telling you how it works. Because there's a difference between not being able to explain something and not liking the explanation that's given. Those are two completely different things. It's perfectly explainable, it's just you don't like it. And usually after about the fifth time of me trying to explain this kind of shit, people stop asking because they don't know how to translate my weird explanations into something they can get. And I do my best to translate it, but there's only so much I can do because you can only understand so much about a paradigm from outside of that paradigm. Okay, that's the problem. It's like if I was to ask it. Well, actually, I have a pretty decent onboard understanding of theoretical physics because before I was interested in magic, I was interested in theoretical physics. But if I was to ask, I don't know, a, a, if I was to ask somebody who was a professional athlete why the fuck they did whatever sport they did, there's only so much he could explain to me from outside of understanding why anyone does that shit. Because I don't understand. Fundamentally, I don't really understand why people engage in sports. It doesn't really make sense to me, and it never has. Doesn't mean that the explanation you give me won't be entirely coherent. Doesn't mean that other people won't be able to hear his explanation and go, okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Or why is this even a question? It just means that I am outside of the paradigm of a person who understands why people like sports. So I don't understand why people like sports generally. But if I was somebody who likes sports, I would imagine I would understand perfectly why people do. And likewise, I'm sure a theoretical physicist understands physics perfectly well, and a mathematician understands mathematics perfectly well. And, a magician understands magic perfectly well. Now, granted, there are some that don't, and there is debate among magicians as to how this shit operates. But when we try to offer you different explanations, you don't synthesize what makes sense to you and then come up with your own. You just disregard it entirely and attempt to subsume magic as though it doesn't exist. You try to eat it. You try to make it into science when it is not science, or you try to turn it into something it is not. Or, in a lot of cases, people just use it as a synonym for Deus Ex Machina because they don't even bother knowing what their own onboard understanding of it would be. They just freely allow it to go undefined, and then they wonder why their personal definition of it is incoherent. Because if you don't bother to define something, how the fuck is it supposed to be anything but incoherent? If you just let it go undefined like that. Fucking annoying. Moving on.
Right, Doomsday Clock proves Dr. Manhattan is so far removed from the ordinary world that he can perceive what others cannot, even powerful magic users. For Manhattan, there exists a scientific explanation for everything. The downside of phenomenal powers in Watchmen is his gradual disconnect with human emotion. This quality, or lack thereof, is what makes Dr. Manhattan the perfect scientist.
He didn't give a debunking scientific definition of magic. He gave a logically consistent one. It didn't debunk anything, it just explained shit. And it was the same explanation that Johnny probably would have given, or that Dr. Fate might, well, Dr. Fate, if he wasn't under the stupidity of the possession retcon, might have given. Because actually, when you get, funny thing, and it's a funny thing that I find kind of annoying, and I'm glad it was retconned out later, but initially, when Gardner Fox created Dr. Fate, who is the most powerful magic user within the context of the DC universe, he wanted to do an homage to H.P. Lovecraft. And H.P. Lovecraft very much did prefer more weird sci-fi explanations for things rather than straight up mystical explanations for things. So in his first issue, and I think also his origin story, or actually no, I think it was his origin story in More Fun Comics 67, when Dr. Fate is when the adult Kent Nielsen is talking to Naboo for the first time and kind of showing off what he has learned, he says something to the effect of, "I have mastered the fundamental forces that rise between atoms," or something along those lines. He essentially equates magical forces to atomic power, but that's because Gardner Fox was an H.P. Lovecraft fanboy and wanted to do an homage to H.P. Lovecraft. So actually, if you want to get right down to it, Dr. Fate was more, strictly speaking, scientific about magic than even Dr. Manhattan was, which might go a long way to prove that, contrary to what Arthur C. Clarke bastardized and for some reason everyone is just okay with, magic is not simply science that no one understands. Because sorcerers and magic users understand it perfectly well, thank you very much. And if you would bother to give them the time to explain how shit worked, even if their personal definition was wrong, you could at least get a better definition than it's whatever we need it to be for plot convenience sake. Dumbasses. Here endeth the rant. For now.
Oh, it's over.
Next.
Yeah, this one I sent. Well, from now on, everything's what I sent. This is from GeekTyrant.com. Rob Zombie shares new concept art and teases costumes for his Monsters movie. That was published about a week ago. Okay, so full disclosure, I and Don and I had a discussion about this Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I grew up more with Monsters, like reruns of the Monsters, than the Addams Family.
Yeah, I was very much an Addams Family kid. And it might go a certain way to explain why I'm so, well, me. I think that in another life I was probably adopted by the Addams.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, like I had heard about this, but I a part of me kind of wish it wasn't true because of my kind of opinions towards Rob Zombie. Rob Zombie is primarily a horror film director. Makes He's kind of responsible for the I believe the Halloween reboot movies, where I believe he no yeah.
Yeah, the one where Michael Myers was inextricably giant for no reason.
I thought that was cool for what it was.
I
I
mean,
don't know.
it was an interesting take, and I actually really kind of like the Rob Zombie Halloween remakes, but still, it's a little bit weird of all of all the monsters in horror you could have done that to. You take the most ordinary human one, you turn him into almost the Hulk.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the shape was never really never really human.
Well, we never really see his human face because of the discount William Shatner mask.
Yeah.
That's actually a really funny story about the making of the Halloween movies. They wanted to give Michael a mask, and so somebody just went out to a local comic store and bought a really, really cheap, creepy looking William Shatner Star Trek mask, and a horror icon was born.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Again. I. I don't. I'm on the fence about Rob Zombie because like he has interesting ideas when it comes to his movies. Um. Mainly, I just think he needs someone who can really write the script. That's always the problem for me when I watch his movies.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure who's doing the writing this time around, but
Uh, I'm not either, but I'm both intrigued and somewhat weirded out by this that he's making a monsters movie. I'm just kind of curious on what his take on it is. So let's read this and we'll look at the costume images that they have here.
Mhm.
Okay, so director Rob Zombie has shared some new concept art and other design work involving the costumes from for his upcoming film adaptations of The Monsters. This latest batch of items reveals additional costume designs for Herman and Lily Munster, Herman's headpiece that the actor will be wearing, and some actual costumes that have been created. Um, well, yeah, okay again, and like full disclosure for me and the Monsters, It's been a long time since I've seen it. I'm not gonna lie. Okay,
Mhm.
that's full disclosure there. But what I really liked about it was it is it is like Adam's Family, but less weird. I know that sounds bad. I know that sounds bad, but what I mean is like it is it is effectively a traditional.
They're a normal suburban family who just happen to be monsters. The Addams family are ironically a little bit less monstrous than the monsters,
Yeah.
but they play against type and play against suburbia more. Um, because
And
they,
don't get me wrong. See the
they more love the fact that they're weird, whereas the monsters would rather just be viewed as the all American suburban family,
right. No,
despite the fact that they're monsters.
no, I agree. I see the appeal of the Addams Family, and I do like them for that. I do. But again, it's just like the whole thing with like they are just regular people, even though they don't look like it. I find really compelling and interesting to me
Mm-hmm.
because, like, again, when you think monsters, you obviously like the monsters that they are, you think you know how you think of mindless monsters, obviously.
Yeah, murder and mayhem and dismemberment and all
Yeah,
that business.
but just to see like an average, fairly typical American suburban family, but as monsters. And don't get me weird. Don't get me wrong. They can be weird. I mean, the father works as I believe, mortician, or Herman.
Which, to be fair, is probably the only job he could get, but never mind.
Fair enough. Yeah. But no, they are. They're. It's just a nice family, and they're very wholesome. They care about each other, love each other, and yeah, they're just again.
Yeah.
It's more. They are more playing against the type of what they actually are than playing against type of, I guess, the traditional family sitcom roles.
Other distinction that's worth noting: the Addams are loaded, whereas the Munsters are middle class.
Another part of me that kind of relates more to the monsters than the Addams family.
Yeah, and I aspire to one day be that rich eccentric dude. So
Yeah.
I guess that might be one of the other reasons. Plus, I've always wanted to live in like an old school like manor house type house.
I could never, honestly. Just my paranoia of it being haunted would drive me insane.
Gee, if only you had a occult expert and exorcist on call. Oh wait.
Even if I knew, I'd still be paranoid. It's the shadows, man. It's the shadows. It'll always be the shadows.
Again, this can easily be resolved by the fact that you have someone who deals in that shit, probably literally on speed dial.
I don't know how to set speed dial.
Oh my. He's a zoomer who boomered it, ladies and gentlemen.
I just know how to make a call and text, dude. That's all you really need to know how to do on a phone.
Again, he is 21. I swear to you, he is a zoomer, but he's for all intents and purposes, he's a boomer.
I was raised by boomers. What do you expect?
Fair play.
Yeah. Okay, so continuing the article. It's so weird that Rob Zombie is making this movie. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, again, it's weird, but I am willing to take a chance.
It honestly doesn't surprise me that Rob Zombie would have a really nostalgic connection to the Munsters and would therefore want to make a movie on them. Because I expect
Okay.
Rob Zombie was the kind of weird kid who did like the Munsters and the Addams Family and so on.
Right. I'll be completely honest.
It fits with his persona is what I'm saying.
Right. No, I get that. I will. Again, I agree that it is like with the author of this article. It is weird, but mainly because before I really started to really think about it, I always considered Rob Zombie kind of the Zack Snyder of horror films.
That is probably a fair comparison, yes.
However, I feel like that is kind of degrading on Mr. Zombie's part. He is he's not a bad creator. I think again he just goes a little too much in a direction that he needs someone he needs someone that bounce ideas off of, and like someone can help construct a better story for him.
He has George Lucas syndrome.
Kinda, yeah. Like he can do edgy, and I'm fine with edgy when when it makes sense.
Yeah. Which honestly results in me thinking this would probably go better if he was making an Addams Family movie instead of a Monsters movie, because the weird for the sake of weird and loving it is very much more an Addams thing than it is a Monsters thing.
Yeah.
The Monsters would rather just be the cool suburban neighbor type, whereas the Addams are like, nope, we know we're weird and we love every minute of it. Screw you.
It's kind of
Well,
funny.
not screw you, because usually the Addams are fairly well intentioned. It's like we're throwing the weirdest party on earth and everyone's invited, sort of thing.
It's funny bringing up the whole suburban thing with like the story we're working on.
Oh yeah. I kind of just for the sake of humor, like to imagine that Jericho is
Dude,
like
dude.
I God damn it. But
I'm,
I imagine our characters move in on the same street as the Munsters and the Adams. Like the Adams Manor house is like at the end of their street, and actually, if our characters wind up being like the next door neighbors,
anyway,
yeah.
we gotta move on. Okay, this will be a very different kind of project for him, and it's looking like he's going to stay close to what we all enjoyed about the original series. Okay, so Zombie has expressed his love for this franchise several times, and I think he's looking to capture the tone, spirit, and style of that show. I check out the images down below, and here's some concept images of the characters' costumes, specifically Herman and uh, Lily.
Mhm.
They're pretty good. The red for Herman's suit is it's not something expensive, but then again, I guess I'm just really used to
The black and white.
yeah.
I'm sure a colorized version of it exists somewhere that they got this idea from.
Right.
They colorized everything eventually.
Yeah, but I think it was just normal black suit he was wearing.
I mean, a little bit of extra style didn't hurt anyone.
No, I'm not saying that. It's just like it's weird because again I'm so used to.
Yeah, you're used to the black and white, and so if anything, like I was almost expecting this to look almost Tim Burton-y with the black and the white.
Yeah, that actually would be a good inspiration. That would be good inspiration for doing a monsters movie.
I mean, it also worked pretty well for the Adams. The Adams, well, no, Tim Burton was a producer on, I believe, both of the '90s Adams movies.
Yeah. Lily looks fine. It feels a little more witch than vampire, to be fair.
And well, but also to be fair, the sort of iconography of the vampire has moved along as well. So there's
Yeah,
that.
I mean, it's fair. I don't know. I feel like the hood is a bit much, because again, like Lily's hair was always more striking to me.
Hmm.
But yeah. And we see the headpieces here, and it also looks like a full face mask right here in the corner. Looks really cool.
Hmm.
And I don't know what this is because it looks like the back of a jacket. Oh wait. You know, huh? This might be grandpa's cloak.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I got nothing really to say. I mean, like, I'm interested in. We might cover the trailers, probably.
Yeah.
Actually,
And when it comes out, we'll probably end up reviewing it.
yeah. It's been a while since we've done an actual review.
I'm gonna assume you didn't manage to watch the Suicide Squad while you were sick.
I was not. Hopefully this weekend we will be able to. It's just I've been a lot of stuff's happened.
Okay, it's no problem. I just really want to geek out about Suicide Squad and how awesome it was. Is all.
I've heard good
'Cause,
things.
yeah, Suicide Squad 2021 was awesome, folks.
I mean, we kind of already knew that.
Well, a lot of people were like, for some reason, just unimpressed by the trailers, and I'm just like, but like you know who James Gunn is, and you know who the Suicide Squad are. How is this not gonna work amazingly?
Um, well, my theory.
Hmm.
Well, it's kind of a two-part theory. One, the original Suicide Squad and all of its shit left a bad taste in people's mouth. Therefore, anything relating to the project kind of spoiled them, soured them to.
Yeah, but that's why it's a good idea to call this the Suicide Squad instead of Suicide Squad 2, because it's basically an admission that, like, oh shit, we fucked up. Let's completely reboot this franchise.
Right, and two, you remember how I mentioned, like, all the time, like, people are so used to being angry about everything that they can't see anything good?
Yeah, it does seem to be that mostly.
I feel like it's a good mixture of both, which is unfortunate. Anyway,
I mean, yeah, moving on.
unless you have something to say.
No, I was just gonna kind of repeat my summation for the folks in the audience, of kind of what I thought of Suicide Squad, 2021. Suicide Squad 2021 is zanier than either of the Guardians movies, and more over the top adult humor and gore than Deadpool, either of the Deadpool movies. So if you like both the Deadpool movies and you like both of the Guardians movies, and you kind of want to see them both put together and then taken to 11, Suicide Squad 2021 is that movie, basically.
Okay. Okay. So, BleedingFool.com, indie TV series Ditch, crowdfunding a pulp serial TV series. This by Chris Brawley, published August 3rd, 2021. Me and Dawn had a discussion about this, and we kind of both agreed that it's just something, and we don't do this often. It's just something that deserves recognition.
Yep.
All right, so Ditch is the story about a brazen thief that's been hired to steal the impossible, and creator John Fiorella, who first came up with the concept back in 2007, has decided to launch a crowdfunding campaign to turn his vision into a pulp serial television series. Fiorella describes the concept as a comic book come to life, with larger-than-life characters, kick-ass action, and an unexpected plot twist designed to take your breath away.
All right. Well,
Um,
hit me with your best shot, Choke.
Yeah, there is a video here, but we may check that out later. I want to get through the actual article first.
Okay.
Okay, the idea dates back to 2007. Fiorella explains back then the initial concept was to make an ultra low budget horror film in the spirit of Evil Dead 2, but after Ash vs. Evil Dead came out, I threw everything out and started from scratch. Turn the property on its head and shaping it into a sprawling epic adventure. If you like The Mandalorian, this will be right up your alley. It's striving for that same level of fun, episodic adventure.
I wouldn't really describe The Mandalorian as fun, though. It's a little bit too dark and serious for that.
First season.
Like I was thinking more along the lines of like Indiana Jones or The Librarians, maybe, from the description.
I don't know. Let's keep reading. I'm very curious. All right, so Fiorella definitely has chops. His indie short Grayson went viral back in 2005, and he boasts decades worth of experience writing, producing, and directing content across all mediums. Right. Yeah. Well, I know about this Grayson thing because like it is a video that kind of before YouTube, or like when YouTube was first starting. This video was on there. I watched it. It's really just like a fan pitch kind of deal. It's actually really interesting. I didn't know it was like kind of a short film. I thought it was like just a pitch kind of thing. You know, like an actually fan filmed fan trailer deal. Yeah. Sorry, I was kind of tired. Okay, so currently John is spending most of his time to market the campaign. When asked how he's spending his days, John is quick to tell you he's marketing my brains out, trying to get more people to see the pitch. This is literally a passion project for Fiorella, who says that this project represents everything he loves about Spielberg's Spielberg's adventure classic Raiders of the Lost Ark, but with his own spin on the genre, mixing elements.
Okay, so he is going kind of a Raiders mode.
Yeah.
Well played, sir.
Mixing elements of horror and fantasy into a thrill fest punctuated with cliffhangers. His goal for Ditch is to ride that line between family friendly and oh man, this is so insane. I can't believe my mom's letting me watch this.
So, cross between Evil Dead, Indiana Jones, and The Mandalorian. Yep. That'll do, pig. That'll do.
Way back in the day when my parents got divorced, at night I would sneak out of bed and watch Raiders of the Lost Ark on VHS. I did this routinely for nearly 8 years straight. That break from reality was a treasured escape that played a pivotal role in getting me back on my feet, which is why I'm determined to pay it forward.
Okay, I am completely on his side with this.
Yeah, sounds like pure escapism, and we could use that right about now. If you're interested in supporting this campaign and helping bring John's vision to life, check out the Kickstarter page here. I will bring that up now. Just give it a minute to load. Yeah, it is an interesting pitch. Like I said, we're gonna talk about the Kickstarter a little bit. Maybe watch the pitch video. I should probably watch the pitch video, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of advertising this.
Well, I mean, come on. You heard what he said. It's Raiders plus Evil Dead plus Mandalorian.
Right. Yeah.
This kind of writes it. This kind of produces itself.
Yeah. So this is on. Yeah. So this is on Kickstarter.com. There is a link to it down below if you want to check it out yourself. Yeah, Ditch TV series, New Hero, 48 years making. It has a pledge goal of $50,000. Unfortunately, if I'm being realistic, I don't think it's going to reach that goal within the 39 days to go.
Oh no! So, someone with money, greenlight this thing, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want? I think we'll watch the video first.
Honestly, I think we've read all the information we need to get from the article, so now we just really need to watch the thing. But I need to jump out and jump back in because my screen froze. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll be back in just a minute.
Yep.
Hello. Brainstormer. And now I can't hear anything and I can't see anything. God damn it.
Yeah, no, I have my mic muted.
Okay.
Also, my connection's getting a little wonky. as well, so it was a little slow.
Okay.
Can okay? I'm moving my
Yes,
mouse.
I can
Okay.
see it.
Okay. This is a form due to YouTube and stuff. Granted, this isn't a YouTube video itself, but just to be safe.
Yeah, because copyright, we need to pause every 20 seconds and comment.
Yeah, this is a 4 minute and 28-second video. Shall we? I feel like we gotta say something because this is like a pulp adventure story and all.
I can't think of anything that is particularly like pulp adventure-y.
Nah, I guess let's just go with banana for now. Shall we?
Yeah, banana.
Banana.
This idea goes way back to the beginning, back when I was hooked on Heroes. First, there was this guy, then this guy. Hell, it didn't matter if it was blue and fuzzy. If it wore a cape, I was crazy for it. There may have been only 5 TV channels back then, but there were plenty of reruns running around the clock. It was the age of masked men.
I think you can just tell the excitement.
The love coming off the screen here is palpable. Yes.
Yeah. I love how he's like also using like Lone Rangers, or he's not just using
Yeah, it's also the pulp heroes, and I'm sure if he had known about the Shadow, he would have included like the Shadow and whatnot. But
well, to be fair, I don't think the Shadow. Well, no, it did. It just
the Shadow was in the era before this, like radio serials was his big adaptation. So
I kind of want to try and find and listen to those.
They're pretty good. I've listened to a couple of them. I haven't made a practice of listening to them or anything yet, but I need to own more of Shadow stuff. I own the entire Robert E. Howard Solomon Kane pulps, because you can get those on Amazon for like $15, oddly enough. But I don't own any of the Shadow yet, and that bothers me.
Shall we?
We shall.
Banana.
And dynamic duos and clever captains. My days were consumed with superheroes doing super things, and each year these champions got better, stronger, faster. Oh, and then these guys showed up, and my hero dial cranked to an 11 with brave robots, Wookiees, and a defiant princess that just embodied raw strength.
Oi, Disney! Pay attention!
I'm just enthralled by like how much passion he's really just talking about this stuff.
But seriously, like, why can't we get people who were actually in these industries talking about these things this way? How? Why don't you get him to write for? Yeah, in addition to the Oi Disney, pay attention, Oi Marvel, get this guy to write some things, please.
Yeah.
But no, of course not, because people who actually care about and are invested in these things are just delusional and childish, and we have to make everything sociopolitically a means to an end, otherwise it's inferior because reasons.
Shall we?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just
I get you. It's just like I get you. It's just like it's the same old song and dance. We get it. We're trying to be positive right now.
Yeah. Banana. And she wasn't the only woman leading the charge. Man, I loved them all. The shapeshifters, the tin cans, the scoundrels, the daring and fearless. Heroes from every world and all the unknown worlds in between. These guys set my imagination free and fueled all my childhood adventures.
Right there with you, brother. I mean, they were different heroes for me, but right there with you.
I got nothing to say. Shall we?
Banana.
until things took a turn. At the age of 12, my parents got divorced, and it sent me down in a dark place. To cope with the emotional chaos, at night I would sneak out of bed, make my way downstairs, and watch the one VHS tape that we actually owned.
So again, time.
This is beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Banana.
I must have watched that movie every night for nearly a year straight, no lie. Just to see Indy continue to fight when all hope seemed lost, that's what got me back on my feet. Once I was up, boom! I was determined to return the favor for the next generation of Lost Boys by creating some heroes of my own.
And again, Marvel, could we please get this attitude into the industry? Like now would be good.
Shall we?
Banana.
By the time I got to film school, I found myself up against a faculty that had no love for heroic cinematic spectacle, so I gave it to them in spades, with a contraption engineered to deliver full-on, Ben-Hur level widescreen. It was there I joined forces with filmmaker Gabe Sabloff. We went about blasting bad guys and fighting demons until there were no more professors to prove wrong. From there, we journeyed to the movie capital of the world, where we directed commercials, worked on marketing campaigns, storyboarded our ideas and proposals to try and hook investors, which meant.
And again,
where is this in modern Hollywood?
yeah, because from all the stories that I've heard and just my general distaste of Hollywood and like the bureaucracy bullshit that it goes through.
Yeah, and the old guard film press being all aristocratic and moralistically tutting every 5 minutes.
Yeah, these guys who are working on this, because it's obvious the reason why this isn't like getting announced at something at like a convention or something is because no one would pick this idea up or their idea,
because how dare you actually think that these things have value for their own sake? God damn it!
Right, but also it's just I don't think anyone cared enough.
Yeah, because and this is the sad thing. Despite the fact that comic book movies and superhero movies are the dominant genre in Hollywood right now, 90% of the executives and like 100% of the old guard film press are still in this mindset of that's not real art, that's not a real genre, bullcrap. So yeah, learn Hollywood, learn, goddamn you.
Yeah.
And every person involved with producing actual superhero content, take fucking notes, you morons.
Yeah. Shall we?
Banana.
And writing and rewriting and writing some more. Writing for years and saving up what little money we had to shoot the occasional short film just to keep the artistic juices flowing. There were so many pitch meetings for so many great ideas that fell through the cracks that while working as a lamp salesman, I set out to bring one idea to the screen. Grayson. This 5-minute short.
This is the most relatable thing I've heard in years.
Yeah.
Why is this guy not like the most highly paid writer in Hollywood right now?
You really need to ask that?
Well, no, I know the actual reason. It's just like the world should make more sense than it does, and I'm annoyed that it doesn't.
Yeah. All right. Shall we?
Banana.
Went viral before YouTube was even a thing. It won a slew of awards and opened a dozen new doors to a whole new batch of studio executives, which meant working late into the night with other illustrators down in my garage to make more content concept art and character designs when what I needed was to stop drafting all these different proposals and find a new approach to getting one extraordinary project made. So when I wasn't hosting tea parties, I created Ditch, my original idea for a live-action, half-hour TV adventure series.
I got nothing to say. I'm enthralled.
Yeah, this just needs. This is everything and needs everything. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Banana.
Inspired by my love for the old pulp magazines, comic books, and kick-ass Rosetta book covers, Ditch tells a story about a gutsy thief hired to steal the impossible. His allies, the master swindler, played by the thundering Brian Blessed, and the keeper of knowledge, embodied by the esteemed Julian Glover. These two Shakespearean titans have oodles of blockbuster credits and stellar performances from movies you've watched and rewatched just to hear them laugh, cry, or die a dreadfully grisly death.
My only question is, and I was gonna ask this earlier when you were reading the actual article, but what does steal the impossible mean? I mean, I have a decent idea of what it means because you cited Raiders, which was where my brain first went, was arcane and mystical artifacts and stuff, but that could mean a lot of different things. So are we talking SEP type stuff? Are we talking Grim Collection type stuff?
I think
where are we going here?
I think that's kind of the drawing of the series, is what is the impossible.
Well, no, I think everybody has some kind of onboard understanding of what the impossible is.
I mean what?
Yeah, what actual artifacts and stuff he's going after and stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, Banana.
These two masterclass thespians, a drawer full of storyboards, and all 10 episodes of the first season already written. I'm turning to you for help. If every fellow nerd out there can donate just $1 to the cause, just one, we can raise enough cash to get the cameras rolling. And if you're in a position to chip in a few bucks more and score some of our super fun swag, maybe we can exceed our goal and shoot the entire pilot. At the end of the day, we all need heroes. Together, we can bring this one to life. So let's take our shot.
All right. This has genuinely convinced me. I wish I had more money to throw at this.
All right. Okay. I mean, we can go. I'll go through some of the rewards to get people interested, or.
Are there any particularly interesting ones?
Hold on. I mean, you get the poster for $50. Something for 100. You get something called the Magician's Knot. Want to make a statement at your next parent-teacher conference? Tap into your love for the dark arts with the necktie worn by the Keeper of Knowledge. You'll also receive okay.
If it were a bow tie, I definitely would, but unfortunately, I'm not sure, so I can't make a decision unless I know what it looks like.
Then you have the ultimate ditch package for pledge 150 or more. So first I'd like to own a pack of ditch training cards, which is fucking cool. Each pack comes with 10 picture cards and a plethora of ditch trivia. Okay. Yeah, that seems to be pretty much it. I mean, this is. Well, I will say, the look of the Magician's Knot looks really cool.
Yeah, that does look cool. Although I can't really tell what kind of tie it is based on that picture.
It's a regular tie, not a bow tie.
Ah, nerd.
And also skulls, like Scepter of Thorns. It's a
Yeah.
wand. Devil's Knuckle, which is dice.
I mean, it sounds cool, and I hope it makes money.
Yeah. Again, links down below if you want to pitch this. We're not telling you should. Just more giving attention to it because it kind of we think it needs it or warrants it.
Yeah, it deserves it. So yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pull up the last thing for tonight, and I'll be right back.
Yeah. And I am now even more interested in this because I didn't realize there was a magic user character involved. But now that I know there is, that's like my one criteria right there met. So yeah. I feel like we both would get along with this guy really well. We met.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I mean, just that blatant level of fanboyism about like pulp, not pulp magazines and Golden Age comics and stuff. It's just yes. I mean, just if you could see my shelves, my comic book based shelf right now, this would become extremely ironic. Because I mean, I've got choked gasp from the EC archives, for one thing. Got Mike Mignola's BPRD and Ape Sapien. And I've got a fuck ton of just other weirdo magic users up to and including the original Jack Kirby run of Edric and the Demon, and the Mask, and Elric of Melba and Solomon King. Like I could go on. So
right. Yeah, so the last thing is, well, it's still comic related, obviously.
Yeah.
And honestly, we wouldn't be good podcasters if we did not talk about this.
Yeah.
This is the Venom trailer of Let There Be Carnage. Second trailer. I think we covered the first.
We did.
It
was a couple of months ago.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. All right. Yeah. Shall we?
Banana.
Lady here. We should be out there snacking on bad guys. I am a predator. I need to be free.
Tom Hardy is just having fun with this. I can tell.
Yeah. And it's
good.
Hard not to have fun.
Oh shit.
Did I cut out? Was that on my end or yours?
You cut out.
Damn. What I was saying was it's hard not to have fun along with him.
Yeah.
When he's having fun. Anyway, banana.
Oh, by the way, in case people didn't notice, Andy Serkis is directing this movie.
Yeah, it's his first big stab at a blockbuster.
Neat. Yep. Banana.
Which is probably where the fun is coming from.
Banana.
Banana.
You have got to get control of your aggression. Or you will get hauled off. Area 51. body.
Live by my rules.
Sorry. Please, let me fix it again. You are a loser.
I know some people, and I can understand it. It's like some people don't like that Venom is its own being now.
No, the thing I don't like about this is I don't like the stupid misunderstanding breakup thing. Like, 'cause it from the first trailer and from the last movie seemed like they were getting along pretty well, and Venom was mostly fine with the arrangement of like tamp your hunger down to just the bad guys, please. So this whole breakup thing of like Venom wants to be more predatory and Eddie won't let him, it's kind of coming out of nowhere. It annoys me. Plus, this series of movies is based very heavily on the Agent Venom comics, where Venom becomes good because Eddie kind of forces it to. So, like I say, I mean, I get it. It's supposed to set up that Venom basically has pregnancy hormones, and then he's gonna give birth to Carnage, and it's gonna wind up in Cletus Cassidy's blood, like you do, and then the whole thing. But still, it's like I wish, honestly, with the humor, I kind of wish they were framing this more as Venom having over-the-top comedic pregnancy hormones, kind of be more funny and a lot more or less annoying than this, I guess.
I disagree, but I feel like if you and I try to have a discussion about this, we're going to be here for hours. So
That is also probably true.
Yeah.
But banana.
Eddie Brock, I want to give you my story. People love serial killers. Please, why me? What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine.
I'm unsurprised that Woody Harrelson is a badass here.
Yep. From the first time, I mean, he's played villains before, but
Yeah, I mean, even characters who weren't villains that he's played have had a little bit of an edge to them, like Tallahassee from Zombieland or Merrick from Now You See Me.
yeah, but well, this role just seems like I don't know how to describe it. Like
He's playing Hannibal Lecter if Hannibal Lecter was a Southern boy.
I suppose so.
Which is something both that I never knew I needed, but also had you offered that to me before, I probably would have told you no. But it works here because that's kind of what Cletus Cassidy is.
I mean, he's not from the South though. He's like from actually like New Jersey or something.
With a name like Cletus,
Wow.
that
It's like the '90s. Okay, he's going for the most edgiest name possible.
Cletus is not edgy. Cletus is more hick than me.
But I don't know what to tell you, man.
Cletus is I've got to keep him away from his sister, or else they might have kids. Levels of redneck.
Okay.
Yeah. Moving on. Banana.
I have tasted blood before, and that is not it. All I ever wanted in this world is carnage.
Connors looks fucking badass. I'm not ever gonna front.
Yep. No, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Let there be carnage, indeed.
Yeah.
Banana.
Yep.
I'm crazy, man. Real vengeful.
I got nothing. I'm just enjoying the ride.
Yeah, this is good. This is very good. Much better than the first one. Banana.
Movie or trailer?
Movie. The first trailer for this movie was also pretty good.
Yeah, I think it was like studio interference that mostly fucked.
Yeah, the we need to make this as much like a 2005 superhero movie as possible for some reason bullshit.
Anyway, shall we?
Yeah, banana.
Banana.
Oh, shit! That is a red one. You need to come out right now. I will make you eat everybody. Promise. I promise. Oh, yeah.
Eddie.
See, now I'm annoyed at Eddie because he's gonna have to retract that later, and Venom's gonna be annoyed.
Well, it depends on the context because when he says everybody, he could be talking about all the bad guys.
I mean, he could, but how is Venom gonna interpret that? Because we know how Venom thinks.
I don't know, man. I feel like you're looking too much into this.
I just don't like them. I don't like Eddie and Venom being at odds with each other. I like the sort of buddy cop or a buddy comedy thing they've got going with him and the symbiote. Is like it works. But I like when Eddie and Venom are in a stable relationship.
Banana?
Banana.
You feel like home to me. Like family.
Shall we?
Yep. Banana.
No.
Oh, wow.
You could just say I'm happy for you.
That was going to be us.
I am happy for you.
No.
God, I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry.
It's too in some serious couples counseling.
Aww.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. It seems like they've taken everything that worked in the first one and turned it up to an 11, and taken everything that didn't work in the first one and kicked it to the fucking curb, and probably ate it.
Hopefully they'll be able to expand on the rating. I feel like it was kind of limited. Like a Venom movie is kind of limited at a PG-13 rating.
Yeah, no, this one's R, I think. So
Cool.
we should
Again,
be
it
good.
makes sense. Like, don't make every movie, like superhero movie, R-rated. Obviously, just when it's
But-
warranted.
Treat the IPs like individual IPs, because this is the number one mistake that a lot of Hollywood types make when they make superhero movies. They, for some reason, think that every superhero movie needs to be the same superhero movie, when that's not the case for any other genre. Why would you think it would be the case for this? Stuff that works for Captain America doesn't work for Batman. Stuff that works for Doctor Strange wouldn't work for
The Flash.
I was gonna say Aquaman, but they kind of did do a little bit of trippiness in Aquaman, and it worked. So
The Flash. Well,
Yeah. no, you're definitely more right there, because that is the crux of why I'm paranoid about Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I think they're gonna try and make it too much like the scientific multiverse instead of the metaphysical one, and it worries me. Hopefully I'm wrong. And to be fair to Doctor Strange 2, all of the pieces are there to make a really good movie out of that, because you've got the title that evokes John Carpenter and H.P. Lovecraft.
Right.
You've got the director who gave us Evil Dead and Darkman and Oz the Great and Powerful. You've got a writer who has a background in Rick and Morty, and you've got Tim Burton's go-to composer. You should be able to make something awesome out of that.
Mhm.
And if you don't, I will judge you harshly.
Anyway. Yeah, so with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, auf Wiedersehen, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Fuck off.